Welcome to the Impatient Entrepreneur Podcast, a show where we hear from entrepreneurs and business owners who are chomping at the bit to make their mark on the world. I'm your host, Lauren Quidar-Cockrell. Now, let's hurry up and get to the good stuff. Hi, friends. Welcome back. I am so looking forward to today's episode. Every once in a while, we get to have a client on the show, and today is one of those days. I have Ben Thomas, who's the founder and CEO of Gatby, which is a really interesting company, and I'm not going to steal his thunder. I'm going to let him tell us what they do, but it has been such a joy to get to know Ben over the past few months and helping his company go to market here in Dallas-Fort Worth. Ben, welcome to the Impatient Entrepreneur.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Lauren. I guess where do you want to jump off?
Yeah, well, I want you to first tell everybody what Gatby is, because it was totally new to me. I think it's novel. You're certainly doing things differently in the marketplace and doing something that I think is fascinating from an equity standpoint also. And so I just want folks, and by equity I mean like equitable for all. I want to hear in your words, what is Gatby? What do y'all do?
Yeah, totally. So, Gatby at its core, the problem we're really solving is that, there are millions of consumers, particularly in Texas, right, that have the ability to choose their own electricity provider, right? And, there are over 100 providers, right? There are thousands of plans out there. And so that whole process, to date has been a very confusing, sort of opaque, problem for a lot of Texans. And so we sort of describe what we're solving for is, delivering sort of affordable and reliable plans to consumers across the state. Now we're expanding to other states. We'll talk about it a little bit more. But we sort of experienced it ourselves, right? What is a build credit plan? What is a teaser rate? Sort of all these different gimmicky plans. And so either ourselves or our family members have been put on a bad electricity plan, dealt with really expensive rates or confusing sort of logic, et cetera. And that was pretty unsettling. And so, we launched Gatby sort of as like an Amazon for electricity or a kayak for electricity, and basically really trusted, transparent providers list their plans on our site. We vet these providers. So basically we're making sure they've been in business for a long time. They have great customer service. All of their rates, right, are simple, fair, clear to understand, sort of, et cetera. And it's great. We partner with these providers and we deliver these plans to consumers, and it's been a really, really fun sort of ride.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to ask you some more questions about that in a second, but I want to ask the first formal question is, Ben, are you an impatient entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny. I would say so. I probably, I'm sure, my team would agree with me. I think, most startup founders, I suspect, would say the same thing. And, it's really a function of, there's so much to do in so little time. Mm-hmm, right. And I think, being able to sort of, build products and get them in the world. And the second you start having, tens of thousands of consumers using it, that sort of ramps the intensity, which makes, us perhaps a little bit more impatient. But I like to tell people, I think we're short-term impatient. I think we're long-term patient. The challenge of going into industries that are incredibly, unsexy and complex, from a regulatory perspective, we're dealing with utilities, home power, is that, these industries are generally pretty antiquated, and, a lot of the stuff we're looking to accomplish just takes time. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, we are impatient because we think so much can be done and changed in the electricity market, but we also have to sort of reflect on, these things will take years. And so, how do we sort of, not run into walls and beat our head against them,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Who did you go to first when you came up with the concept for Gatby? Did you talk to consumers first, or did you talk to energy providers first?
Yeah, in any marketplace trying to solve for, where do the first conversations? I think for us, it was really consumers, right? Mm-hmm. I started another company called Nutiliti about 5 years ago, and Nutiliti was focused on sort of bill splitting for renters, and it ultimately scaled into, utility billing for really large property managers. And so as a function of helping people pay, their electricity, their water, their gas, their internet bills, we found that a lot of these renters and consumers were asking us, hey, am I on a bad electricity rate? Hey, what does this plan look like? What provider should I go with? Hey, I just got screwed with $1,000 bill, even though I live in a 1-bedroom apartment, right? And so, we started really seeing that sort of consumer and customer feedback. And I think everything sort of leads from that, right? When consumers are telling you their problems, that's when you start sort of inspecting and investigating it. And so the first conversations we had with the renters is, it's me and our growth team, right? And our ops team sort of sitting down with these folks and saying, hey, what are you seeing? Why is this confusing? Why is this painful? And then after that, we sort of went and said, hey, let's go talk to some of the energy providers. We're a Texas-based company. We're based out of Houston. And so, being the energy capital of the world, we have amazing access to sort of the best and the brightest from an energy provider perspective. And we started sort of crystallizing the thesis around, hey, if we can come in and, deliver a really sort of modern, intuitive marketplace experience, we think a lot of people would be happy about it. So the short answer is we started with consumers, then extended to the energy providers themselves.
Okay. How did the energy providers receive the model that you wanted to go to market with?
I mean, I think the good energy providers, right, that can sort of, sit behind, what we call the bad energy providers that, maybe have a little bit more, from a predatory practice perspective. The good providers are obviously super enthusiastic about it, right? Because now you have a purpose-built platform for them. And I think some of the other providers that, perhaps, have done okay, screwing over consumers, et cetera, they probably weren't as, excited to pick up my phone call and engage with me. But, as you can imagine, that's sort of with any industry, right? And so, I think energy providers are really excited about the fact that we could offer them a great platform, to consumers. If you think about an energy provider, they're trying to get more customers. And so, they're sponsoring basketball teams. You have arenas or stadiums, or they're spending a lot of money on that stuff, or billboards. We're a more cost-effective way of them acquiring customers. That's sort of the same way you think about really any marketplace. It's easier for a seller to list their products on Amazon and immediately access demand, right? Versus them going out and trying to sell the product themselves. And so we view ourselves as enabling these energy providers to really focus on their core competency, which is delivering really competitive rates to consumers at scale. That's sort of the way I would sort of describe it and think about it.
So I want to back up for a second and talk about, not to point fingers or anything, but you are a relatively young founder, and you already have accomplished so much. Not at your age, but just in general, you've just accomplished a lot more than folks twice your age will ever accomplish in some ways. How do you make sure that you're the leader that you need to be? How do you fuel yourself? Do you read or listen to books? Are you a podcast person? Are you going to conferences? Like, how do you make sure that you're staying ahead of the curve, that you're ready to lead your team and be a great business, et cetera?
I mean, I think a lot of it comes from sort of mentors and, investors and advisors who are much older than me and much wiser. I think, these guys have sort of gone through all sort of the scaling issues and leadership lessons. And I think having a really good feedback loop with these guys and ladies as well has been really productive for me, especially as you learn to level up as a company grows, right? And I think also the other side of it is exactly what you described. I'm always sort of reading founder biographies, or, really, I sort of describe it as like curating an information diet, right? That is taking in all these amazing, resources around leadership and startups and technology and business, right? So, I'm spending a lot of time on, stuff that really helps me be a better leader, because obviously I'm playing from behind. You're right. I'm not 40 years old. I'm not 50 years old. And so, I listen to podcasts, like, Invest Like the Best, Colossus. That's a podcast network that also has, a Founders Field Guide, and it has the Founders Podcast, which talks about all of these amazing founders and what they've done. And, the podcast also interviews guys like Frank Slootman, right? Great leader, was the CEO of Snowflake and other companies. And, his book is called Amp It Up, right? And it's how do you get the best out of your team, things like that. And so, I think that's really the way I try to sort of consume information that helps me sort of level up, even though I may look young and I am sort of young. It allows me to sort of, play outside of my age, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I would say, I find entrepreneurs to be a very hungry for information group. I mean, it's very homogenous in that way. I think, I think there's a lot of things we have in common, even if all of us are very different. One, I think you have to be a little bit delusional and optimistic in order to do this. And two, I think you're curious about the world and want to be better and want to consume information. I haven't met many who are like, no, I'm good.
Yeah, exactly right. You get it.
No more information. Is there anything in particular that you're impatient about right now?
I think, we recently launched a new kind of feature called Gatby Group Rate. And really, this is sort of our foray into, what you'd call social commerce. We think that, so many industries, you have the concept of sort of bulk buying or grouping together, businesses to go and, procure a lower rate, sort of think about like Costco, by buying in bulk, you get lower. So sort of like with inspiration from that idea, the idea is that, you have hundreds of thousands of consumers over the course of the year that are shopping for electricity at the same time. Right now, or previously, they've been doing it sort of in a siloed way. Like, hey, I'm just signing up for my house. Well, what we sort of figured out and what we created was, hey, let's create a product where we can group together all these people who are shopping together at the same time. And then electricity providers go and compete, right? With the lowest bid and to win the whole group. And so, what I'm impatient about is, getting, that product out there, getting, more distribution, getting more communities involved, because, I really do believe that's the best way to shop for electricity, leveraging those savings. So I would say that's what I'm really impatient about right now.
There aren't a lot of like actual win-wins in the world. It's interesting that, in the group rate program where folks are banding together, if they don't need energy today, then maybe it's a month from now or so, they can come together, they get the lowest rate, and then the energy provider who wins, like they get a broad swath of customers all in one. I mean, I would sign up for that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, great summary. Totally.
Do you find that you need to carve out space for yourself to come up with these ideas? Are you sourcing them from your team? Like, how does that work when you're ideating and finding new ways to do things in an old industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a majority of our sort of idea generation, comes from sort of the consumer feedback loop. And I think a lot of that's driven by our ops team, right? So, we have a great ops team, Hank and Ashley, they're sort of reporting to me, hey, this is what customers are complaining about, or this is what they're seeing, or this is what they're requesting. And I think that's one way to generate ideas that you can go and invest in your product. I think the other side of it, and sort of where this idea came from, is just broader pattern recognition, right? We look to really, really great sort of disruptive companies, right, across the universe, like Robinhood or Coinbase or Amazon, Kayak, Expedia, whatever. And we take a lot of inspiration, from what they have done. Right. And we sort of say, hey, wow, actually, we could do the same thing, but we could do it for the electricity market because no one's done it here before. And so I think, you're always sort of recognizing patterns across different industries, different product types, and trying to synthesize those learnings and then, try to figure out, hey, does this deliver a better product to our consumer? And if that's the case, you end up with great features like group rate and some of the other stuff we're working on.
Yeah, I love that. I call that being a honeybee, when you're taking something that works with another industry and applying it to yours. It's like, well, I'm seeing this over here in, auto manufacturing or whatever it is. And then you get to be novel in your industry. People are like, whoa, how did you come up with this?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, this is your second company that you have founded. What's something that's happened in your entrepreneurial journey where things are, trucking along, and then all of a sudden you felt like the rug got pulled out from underneath you and you're like, oh, wow, I'm not sure how I'm going to survive this, but ultimately it turned out to be one of the best things that could have happened?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think there are like a lot of these sort of, inflection points. I think one big one was, the company that we started, Nutiliti. I started it with, a lot of, I'm really my best friends who I've known for a very long time. And ultimately, as we were scaling that business, we're, doing millions in revenue, but I sort of, saw this sort of energy choice, product line, great sort of feedback from customers. And so we actually incubated that within Nutiliti. And ultimately, me and my co-founders, right, we started, disagreeing around resource allocation. And I think I really thought that this would be the future. And they didn't as much, which is totally fine. And I think, ultimately, right, the company I brought in, it was definitely the company I started. And, I had to sort of resign. I had to leave the company because obviously, more of them, there was one of me. And so, I think that's probably an experience that I think was really profound. They're great folks. I think, one of those things about building companies is over time, you have, you may have different views on the world and where the company is headed and where we should be investing, and that's okay. But, certainly that was the moment where I was like, man, it really sucks, not being able to log in and work with your best friends and being able to still do that thing. So I think that was certainly a moment, where, that was, complicated for sure. And, But the other side of it was that, that's how Gatby was formed, right? We
Mm-hmm.
acquired this energy choice product line out of my previous company, and then we really scaled it ever since, and that's been amazing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's been awesome. We have a great team at Gatby, and so that was sort of the phoenix rising out of the ashes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I still look super fondly on Nutiliti. They continue to disrupt sort of the utility billing space, and Gatby, we're doing the same thing, and I think both of these product lines being independent businesses is actually, ultimately the right way for this to have evolved, right?
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, you have to always, you don't look back in anger, right? These are all great
Mm-hmm.
experiences, tremendous lessons. But I would say that's the way that's the one that's very notable that I
Yeah.
would probably describe. Yeah.
Well, it's hard to leave, and especially it's like it's your baby. You helped create
Yeah.
it. You've got this new baby that you believe in. Like, was there something that told you this is the right horse for me to personally bet on? Like, this is going to be okay, or did you just have to have faith?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything's sort of faith-based, right? I mean, I think we were very highly convicted in really both products, but I certainly had
Mm-hmm.
more conviction in what was happening in the electricity markets. I think
Mm-hmm.
every incremental year you continue to see electricity rates
Mm-hmm.
rising.
Mm-hmm.
That has been a constant, right? The grid is sort of destabilizing. You have a market, right, where now you've got batteries and you've got solar renewables and the
Mm-hmm.
electrification of really everything. And so I was very animated and excited around this opportunity in particular. But ultimately, you're not exactly sure if the dogs are going to eat the dog food, right? And so until you
Right.
build a product and
Mm-hmm.
really try selling it, you don't really know. And so I think I was obviously highly convicted, but
Mm-hmm.
launching any new product or doing something like this requires a lot of faith too, I'd say.
After starting Gappy, like how long was it until you had kind of critical mass with a team and a product and we're rocking and rolling?
Yeah, yeah. So, when we started Gappy about a year and a half ago, I'd say
Mm-hmm.
it was probably around, 6 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were building the infrastructure, we were signing agreements with energy providers, we were partnering with large property managers to offer this to
Mm-hmm.
their renters, and all those things take time, right? Ultimately, you're building out a lot of sort of back-end infrastructure, and while you're sort of like, building out even what the application looks like, right? And so you're spending a lot of time designing the product, et cetera. So I'd say probably 6 months. And then once we sort of got it out there and got it to market, because we sort of were able to take a lot of the learnings from our experience and our customer feedback and get these energy providers integrated in their plans listed on the platform, we were able to get going pretty quick. And so that's been super encouraging. It's amazing how quickly the time goes by. I can barely believe it. It's just it's really remarkable. But yeah, that's what happens when you have a great team in place that's extremely passionate about what we're doing. Great partners across the board, from property management clients, right, to our energy providers, right. All of those things I think really combine together to sort of get us off the ground, and we've been really lucky ever since. A lot of luck plays into it too. I always have to note that.
Well, it does, but also lots of hard work. Going from a team of co-founders to you being the CEO and sole founder of Gappy, like, is there anything there that folks can take as a lesson, or um, anything that you feel like is an important point to make? To get you started, I used to have a
Yeah.
bit partner-ish thing, and um, uh, they ultimately decided to close their business. And at the time, it was extremely scary and disruptive. And, but ultimately, it had to happen. Like, this was one of my felt horrible at the time, but had to happen situations, because we were able to grow so much more quickly without, well, like shackled, but it was like, that was, it's hard to make decisions when it's consensus and everyone's bringing a lot to the table, but it's also very lonely when you're by yourself too. I mean, you have a team, but
Yeah.
you're out there by yourself, which is why we have this podcast for asynchronous group therapy. But for your experience, is there anything that you can offer to folks who might be exiting a partnership and looking to go out on their own? Any words to share, or any lessons you learned?
Yeah, I think the greatest value that I have having co-founders and really being able to spend that time with them is having really great sparring partners in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the ideas around the product vision, around the roadmap. I think that's what I really really valued about that. And so I was very conscious, right, when I moved to sort of the sole board member, sole CEO approach with Gappy of how do I build sort of advisory board or a network of folks that can actually, continue to have this sort of intellectual sparring partners with, right? And have these really, intense conversations on where the company's going, but also having the agency to know that, hey, even if I disagree and all these folks disagree with me, we're still going to go and we're going to go take a run at, whatever I think. And if I'm wrong, I'm totally wrong, but I own it, And so I think, you're going to take a lot more ownership because, you can't say we made this decision by committee and this person had that opinion and that was wrong. And this, you sort of have to, you sort of grow up a bit because now, you're the only, person truly accountable for where the company's headed. And I think that pressure is obviously significant, but I think if you can create a great network and advisory board of people that are sort of aligned with you and walking me through this, right? I think, that works as well. And it's super productive for Gatby, but you sort of get the best of both worlds, I think, of having a co-founder team, as well as, hey, having the agency to go and pursue your vision, right? Whether or not it is, there's data to support it or not. And I think it's generally where a lot of folks, maybe fear change or they want more data before they make a decision. And if you, a lot of the times when that data gets there, you're too late, right? And so, having sort of that, ability or authority to sort of go and pursue something, even if the data may not support it today, it's also a really critical part of innovating fast, right? Which also goes back to being impatient entrepreneur. You can sit around and wait for more data to come in, et cetera. But if you're like, hey, this product needs to be out in the world, I'm highly convicted in it. I've had enough people tell me it's a real problem. Well, you just got to get going. You just got to get started.
Love it. Thank you. So growing up, when you were a kid, did you have a paper route or did you sell anything? Were you an entrepreneur as a little boy?
You know what? I really wasn't, I was very fascinated in everything but working, really. I love playing guitar. I love to ski. I love to be outdoors playing soccer and sports. But no, I'd say my brother probably had more of that tendency. I really became interested in entrepreneurship, as a function of my dad starting a company. He'd been exec at an oil and gas operator for a long time. And, when he started his company, it was really exciting. That's sort of when I was, in high school. And so I was always interested in, okay, this is really fascinating, right? The idea that he saw a problem, and he went out and sort of did it. And I think that, after that, and that's when I became a lot more interested in it. So not necessarily my childhood, I didn't have a lemonade stand or anything. Maybe I should have, but I certainly had friends that had lemonade stands and, all that kind of stuff.
And then when you were a kiddo, was there a personality trait of yours that you perceived as a weakness, or people were like, Ben, you need to work on this, son? But either way, you're like, oh, okay, this part of me is not the best part. But flashing forward to today, it's actually your superpower.
Yeah. It's really funny. I got always sort of yelled at around, my inability to focus, right? I have ADHD. I'm always sort of scatterbrained all over the place. And so, obviously, in a sort of academic system or school, it's all oriented around, hey, focus on this one task, get it done, no shortcuts, no real creativity to sort of like answer this, these questions and, et cetera. And so that was, I think, something that, I observed that, I felt like that was a weakness. And, over time, I've really been encouraged around, that lack of focus, being able to sort of move around a lot of different things. It's been incredibly valuable, as a startup founder, ultimately, I'm always sort of context switching, right? Altitude switching, really. Hey, I need to be thinking about the product roadmap, but also need to be sitting with our developers and on the feature that we're building right now and getting in the weeds and doing the design work. Hey, we need to be worrying around, about fundraising and investors, right? But we also need to be worrying about, hey, are we generating sales, adding more energy providers? And so that ability to be able to switch context very easily without sort of, sort of punishing other aspects of the business has been really productive for me. And I think I've been very encouraged, that skill set finally has its use. I started my career in investment banking. I did that for a year. Then I did, private equity for 2 years, and I was at Morgan Stanley Energy Partners. That's a lot more rigid from a structure perspective. There's less, moving around and all that kind of stuff. And so when we started the company, I was very encouraged that finally I had a use for this skill that, maybe was perceived as a weakness way back in the day.
Yes, I can confirm. Lots of altitude switching, lots of context switching as well. But yeah, it's like having to sit still and focus on something feels punitive at this point. I mean, I have to like really be in the right place, the right mindset, physically move around just to be able to do something for more than, 20, 30 minutes at a time. But yeah, I'm with you. What's a piece of advice you can give our listeners to make their lives and businesses stronger and better today?
Yeah. I'd say, something I've really thought a lot more about is, relationships compounds, everything really compounds, spend time learning as much as you can, because that information will help you 5 years down the road. If you're young or you're old, it's never too late to continue to strengthen the relationships you have. I think having, from a personal perspective, amazing friends from high school and college and professional life has been super awesome. And they're a great support system. And I've, reminded myself that, all the late flights and the hard travel days to get to their weddings and see their, 1-year-old, their kids' 1-year-old birthdays and stuff, that's always returned itself in the fact that I have a really great support system. And I would say professionally, a lot of the guys that I started off with, after college, just going and seeing them, starting companies, being super ambitious, doing really great things. Now we're at a point in life where we get to work with our friends too. And so, I can't tell you, that ability to sort of continue to network and really, networking is one word to describe it, but really continue to invest in building relationships. And, whether there's a professional aspect about it or not, your life will be a lot more fruitful if you spend time investing in it. Obviously we got connected through another one of your clients that I know because we're both in the energy business. And so all those things sort of compound. So that's what I'd probably say.
Absolutely. And to extend that even further is not burning bridges unless you are darn sure you're never going to walk across it again.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. The world's a much smaller place than you'd imagine. You'd be incredibly surprised.
Yeah, taking the high road as much as possible. I was actually talking to a friend and colleague the other day, and they're going through something in their life, and they were needing to call upon some old relationships, and we were both like, whoo, you could have lit that one on fire, but good thing you didn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though it feels good, it's like, just leave it in ChatGPT. Don't send it.
Totally. That's exactly right. Yes. Send it to yourself and pretend like you sent it to them, right? I mean, that's
right.
That's really it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love what you're doing. I think it's fascinating. You don't necessarily go to market to find energy providers all that often. It's not like the most delicious task on anyone's to-do list, but y'all have made it. I mean, you kind of gamified it. It's interesting. It's transparent. When you think about like old stodgy industries, like you're democratizing information, you're making it accessible. And then, you think about folks who are on tighter budgets. I mean, being able to give them those tools at their fingertips to make sure that they're getting the best rates and able to use their dollars wisely. I mean, I think it's a really wonderful quest, and especially in hot Texas.
Yeah, right. Seriously.
Very helpful. So thank you for all you do. Where can folks find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, sort of all the, classic ones, Twitter, LinkedIn, follow Gatby on Instagram. We do a lot of fun monthly giveaways. We give away Rockets tickets and Shakira tickets, I think, this week. So
fun.
Find me there. You can reach out. My email is benji@gatby.com if you have any questions. But yeah, those are the best places.
Awesome. And we'll put some links in the show notes. Thanks, Ben.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Lauren. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thanks for listening to The Impatient Entrepreneur. Love the podcast? Be sure to share it with a friend or colleague and give us a 5-star review. You can also chat with us on Instagram or Facebook at The Impatient Entrepreneur Pod. Want to star on a feature episode? Head over to theimpatientrepreneur.com to inquire. Thank you to the team at Quidar & Co. for believing in me and bringing this podcast to life. And thank you to Carson Childers for mixing and editing this episode. I can't wait to see you next time.